I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, about a block and a half from the head of the Chicago mob, actually. My parents were big, they consumed a lot of news. I just was interested in it. I would stand in front, when I was younger, I would stand in front of the mirror with like a hairbrush and pretend I was doing a stand-up, like Jane Horwitz at, the Houses of Parliament. And I got a job at a radio station in Springfield, Illinois, WTAX, WDBR, AM and FM stations. And it was fun there. There were a nice group. I was in Springfield for about 4 months when I got a phone call from Rabin Matthews, who was the assistant news director at WFAA. He said, would you be interested? You'd be just like an associate producer, sort of dog's body when you first get there. And he said, what are you making now? I was earning, I think it was $145 a week, which doesn't sound unusual for that era. And so what does Rabin say? I told him the truth, like an idiot. And Rabin said, oh, well, that's about what our limit is, too. It was our colleague, Rita Flynn, who sort of managed to look at some of the records in the administrative part of the station and see that there was like a $10,000 to $15,000 gap across the board between men and women. Across the board. And the women, the women's rebellion sort of in the newsroom, the women saying, wait a minute, we were still making $10,000 less than most of the guys, at least I certainly was. And I remember someone from, I think it was the EEOC, came in and interviewed us individually. A few months later, I got a notice in my mailbox at home that there was a registered letter waiting for me at the post office. And I thought, what's that about? And I went to the post office and I opened it, and it was a check for about $1,100 or $1,200. It was regarding the EEOC, which had determined that between January 1 and June 1 of 1977, you were underpaid by such and such a percentage, and this is your compensation for that. I didn't feel harassed and I didn't feel threatened. Let's put it that way. Today it would be considered, are you serious? What, yeah, there were silly things, pretending to, have sex acts and stuff like that, like pantomiming stuff. And it would be behind me. So I would go, and then of course, that kind of thing. And it's offensive, yes, but I never felt threatened or unsafe or demeaned. I mean, it was demeaning, obviously, but I never felt like my work I couldn't do what I wanted to do. There were phone calls about me that were anti-Semitic. I'm pretty sure that the news director protected us from a lot of that. I mean, if a call went through to him or to Dave Lane or to the station executives, especially the anti-Semitic or racist stuff, I think he tried to see that we didn't hear about it. At WFAA, I typically did general assignments.
This lot at 2712 Cole Avenue could be the spark that rejuvenates an entire Oaklawn neighborhood. It could be, but there are problems.
I also spent a year as the City Hall beat reporter. Then one day, my news director, Marty Haig, approached me about something that was totally out of my comfort zone. He sat me down and he said, I think you should do a 10-part series. I think it was a 10-part series on religion. We would call it God and Man in the 80s. And you'll talk about the trends happening in religion. And I went, Marty, I'm a Jewish girl from Chicago, and I'm not even observant, let alone, anything at all familiar with religion down in Texas. And he said, that's why. I just started to do research, and I went to W.A. Criswell, who was the pastor of the biggest Southern Baptist church in the country. And I went to a TV preacher of James Robison, and I said, what do you see as the trends in religion in this country?
See the feminists, the gays, the radicals, the liberals, they are activist, organized, and they're moving. We are going to see the decent people, the moral people, the Christian people get organized too.
James Robison says he raised about $9 million last year for his ministry, not as much as some of his more established TV colleagues, Oral Roberts, Jerry Falwell, and others. But Robison says his staff and his video congregation are growing, and with them, he hopes, his political influence.
Then I started going to smaller churches, and I started going to mainstream, like Episcopalian, Methodist churches. And I said, what's happening with you in this new decade? What trends are you noticing? And they said to me, we're losing parishioners like crazy. They're going to these evangelical churches. They're speaking in tongues. And we are empty on Sundays. This was an education for me. I knew nothing. I did one 10-part series. It won an award. My boss liked it. I don't ever have to do one again. The thing I fell into that I really enjoyed most was covering the arts, theater and film.
Pirates of Penzance is the film version of the hit 1980 New York revival of the century-old Gilbert and Sullivan classic. Now, rock stars Linda Ronstadt and Rex Smith are still the romantic leads. Kevin Kline is still the dashing pirate king, and George Rose is the major general.
All right, for those of you who have not read this or do not know it, this is Jane's last day with us. Jane is about to get married, and she's going to be moving to the Northeast.
When I left and got married and moved away to Connecticut, I tried to get a freelance gig doing film and theater reviews at a station in Hartford, which is where we lived. The job I thought I had lined up disappeared. They just realized that nobody missed the critic who had left. So they said, well, we'll save the money. So we moved to Maryland. The station was in Northwest DC, WTTG, and Metro Media. And I was on the air usually about 3 nights a week. So,
as a friend of mine likes occasionally to say, this one really stinks out loud.
And we got a new news director, and it was Fox. So I lasted for a while after that, and then they told us we were gone. So I was there about 4 years. And then Robert Aubrey Davis, whom I only knew from seeing him at theater openings and things, he was an FM classical DJ, and he was also the host of a Critics Roundtable program on the local PBS station, WETA. And he said, well, you could be a substitute for one of our panelists. I eventually became a permanent panelist on the show and even got to fill in as host a couple of times. It was called Around Town.
Around Town, a weekly review of cultural events in the Washington area. Your host for this program, Jane Horwitz.
It was like a half-hour critics roundtable. We would talk about film, theater, and art. And I did that, and then it evolved from being a half-hour show to these short segments they called interstitials.
I'm Jane Horwitz, and my best bet is Roundhouse Theater and Olney Theater Center's co-production of Ink.
I wrote for the Washington Post for years, always as a freelance. I wrote a theater column called Backstage, which already existed before I took it over in 1997. And I would interview people. It was features with directors, playwrights, that kind of thing. And that I loved doing. And then I also wrote a film column for the Washington Post for parents called The Family Film Goer. And I wrote that for them for 23 years. And it was also syndicated for about 20 of those. I think I had a really interesting career. It was interesting. There were definitely issues. There were certainly pay issues, God knows. But they threw us into all kinds of stuff. It gave me courage, I think. I was never a big hard news reporter, particularly. I didn't have that gene. But it gave me the courage to speak up for myself, even in my relationships. It made me probably a stronger person, a little more. It gave me self-confidence, which I didn't have a lot of. Because I knew I could do some of this stuff.